Well, we're going to check in right now with Michael Heinlein. He joins us via Skype to talk about his book called A Handy Little Guide to Spiritual Communion. Thanks so much for being with us, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Well, we talked a little bit about the pandemic as well, and these times are crazy, and there is limited attendance at Mass. More and more people are relying upon the act of spiritual communion. Can you tell us about the origins of it?
Well, theologically, I think it's something that we haven't considered all that much until it's been forced upon us. It really originates with our baptism, of course, that we are grafted onto Christ as members of his body when the water is poured over our heads as infants or adults, and he is truly the vine and we are the branches. Much to our surprise, we haven't needed to reflect on that as much, and maybe this is an opportunity for us to do so. The practice itself is kind of up to the own individual. There's no set particular rubric that you have to follow in order to make an act of spiritual communion, although we can look back in the tradition of the church and see how the saints have advocated for it. You've mentioned St. Teresa of Avila already, and she was a great proponent of the practice herself, saying whenever we couldn't receive Holy Communion, that we should make an act of spiritual communion, which is something we can do. Even if we go to daily Mass, we can make an act of spiritual communion throughout the day. St. Francis de Sales was known to do it about every 15 minutes.
You know, Michael, here at Catholic TV for years and years, we've displayed the act of spiritual communion on screen at the time when communion would be being distributed in our chapel. And every once in a while, something would happen. There'd be a technical glitch and it wouldn't appear. But now I understand better why it is that people, so longed for that prayer to be on screen, because now the extent of people who are not able to receive has been extended to so many more than, the elderly and the sick. Why is this act of spiritual communion, this prayer, so consoling for people?
Well, I think especially in these days when so many more have been exposed to that lack of community and that lack of sacramental union with the Lord, we really understand that Christ himself is always at our side. He's one with us. We are grafted onto his body, as I said earlier. So I think that when we can't receive communion, for instance, if we're homebound all the time, or if we're not able to get to Mass these days, it's a great opportunity for us to reflect on that union with Christ that already exists, even if we might be feeling a little separated and a little bit cut off from the church and from Christ himself without that sacramental union.
I understand, Michael, too, in addition to this amazing resource, you've also worked with Father Harrison Eyre on a timely booklet. Could you tell us about that as well?
Yes, we are very happy that next couple weeks will be a book coming out called Christ in the Crisis, How the Pandemic Can Teach Us. And so we wanted to respond to the fact that God is teaching us something all the time. God is always active. And so what can this pandemic be teaching us? How can we see God's action? And not only that, but how can we see that God has been preparing us to respond to this moment, that God has been preparing us to be people of charity, but also how we can, kind of survive spiritually at this time. So we give some things to think about there and hope that it's a resource for people in parishes and all across the country.
You know, Michael, you're always providing great resources for us, but how are you doing with all of this? It's a difficult time for every single one of us, I think, in one way or another.
Yeah, it's been a difficult several months, of course. We've had a lot of changes in our own family. My grandmother has reached a certain point with Alzheimer's and had to go into a nursing home at a time we would have never wanted to put her into one, but it was a matter of safety for her. So that's been a very great cross to carry these past few months.
Well, certainly we're grateful for your presence here with us, for providing this handy little guide to spiritual communion, which is so important to all of our viewers. Where can people get a copy of the booklet and Finding Christ in the Crisis?
You can get a copy of either. Christ in the Crisis is available for pre-orders, and the Spiritual Communion book is available both at osvcatholicbookstore.com.
OSVCatholicBookstores.com. Michael Heinlein, thank you so much for being with us, and may God bless you in these difficult days and give you the strength to not only take care of yourself and your family, but take care of us through these great spiritual resources.
Thanks so much for having me.